what I find that makes us adults and reasonable people, as opposed to people that get so angry when you ask a question, or because and I've been like this before with some of my beliefs on, like, steroid concepts, for example, dosing and ways of doing things. And it's like, you get dialed into one thing and you don't realize that you could be wrong, and you don't let somebody reasonably explain. And I think that's what I want to do with you here, is break down some facts, no anger, no ways of conveying the information in a kind of a false manner like people tend to do with bias. Mm-hmm. I want to just talk about the realities of the situation. And like you said, it's good if there's people that don't maybe agree or don't know, so they can kind of hear a good informational bit on what the realities are, as opposed to the facades that get passed around, or the stereotypes and things like that we kind of are so enthralled in now with the way that the media is and the way things get passed around. And I think you know where I'm going with this. So
sure.
I know that you wrote a book, the Alpha Male Challenge book, and that's kind of where I want to go with this, because one of the things that I believe you and many others, probably, especially in our bodybuilding world, have kind of struggled with is this, like, I would call it, and I think this is what it is. It's an attack on masculinity. And I've seen it go from like participation trophy things, like little things that add up to where it is today, where it's like there's an attack on being a man. And it's almost like I feel as though there's pressures on us to make us look weak, or make people feel weak or inferior. I think there's a motive there, but you could call that conspiracy or not. But I would like to talk about the attack on masculinity, and also the attack on testosterone in general.
Right. And it's related, right?
Yes.
Masculinity is sort of the testosterone is I suppose like the biochemical marker for masculinity, technically, right?
Right.
So the two kind of get lumped together. You've got many years ago, it was Alan Alda, the actor from MASH,
right,
who I think first used the term testosterone poisoning to refer to the idea that the bad things that people do, particularly that men do, are because of this chemical that makes them, this biochemical in our systems that makes us, act poorly and be violent and be aggressive and take advantage of people and do all these terrible things that, he envisioned. Right.
Right.
And so testosterone poisoning and toxic masculinity are just two different ways of, I think, referring to the same behavior. One referring to the chemical, one referring to, the phenotype, or the way we appear.
Right.
And so, I think there was certainly, even at the time that I wrote with a co-author, that book, Alpha Male Challenge, which was published by Rodale in 2009, even then we were seeing this sort of change in society where traditional masculinity was being devalued, right? And that, those were now seen not as traits that were good traits, but rather they were problems. And that actually escalated through the years, because in 2019, 10 years later, the American Psychological Association came out with a position statement that said that traditional masculinity is toxic, is harmful to boys and men. So the things that we think of as traditional masculinity, strength, stoicism, bravery, how-to, can-do attitude, all of the things are viewed as toxic. That's a huge issue. And even the whole term toxic masculinity, to me, you could never flip that around gender-wise without being ridden out on the rails or canceled. But it's okay, because the society has become more that way. And so we've got this societal and cultural shift toward a less binary, particularly less masculine kind of, value. And we've got, as there's been on a physiological level, there's been a decline in testosterone levels.
Yes.
On average, generation by generation. In other words, the generation that's around now has on average lower testosterone levels than our fathers did.
Yeah.
And our fathers had on average lesser testosterone levels than our grandfathers did. Before that, there probably was no testing, but is it possible that our great grandfathers had higher levels and their fathers had higher levels, and that there's this ongoing diminishing level of testosterone on average? And obviously some people will be higher and some guys lower, but on average, it's this generational decline. And we can talk about why that is, whether it's our diet, whether it's increased obesity, which is definitely linked to low testosterone levels, whether it's phytoestrogens and you know, endocrine disruptors in our diet or in the plastics, but it's a reality. And so we're becoming a less and less masculine society, both at the biochemical level and at the cultural level.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with diet, like you said, and the types of foods and the things that they do to the foods. I think a lot of it is alcohol related and smoking related and things like that. It seems like it gets more prevalent. And this, I feel like there's such a double standard when it comes to everything anymore. And I did a video on accountability a while ago, and it seems like there's a built-in excuse for everything. And it's fair to attack one, but it's not fair to attack the other. And there's these built-in excuses for basically just a lack of being good at what you do.
Right.
And people are not open to any sort of constructive criticism. If anything is deemed wrong, that it's obviously this or this. It can't just be that I'm inadequate at what I'm doing. And that kind of correlates over into the masculine thing. And it's, I don't know who I came up with it or why, but the way that what happens is that it gets passed down. The media grabs a hold of it. It gets thrown out everywhere. It gets put out on social media. It gets put out on news sites, whatever the case may be. Political figures do it. And then before you know it, it's in everybody's head. It's almost like when you were watch a cartoon and they'd get hypnotized, you know, and you like a Bugs Bunny or something. And it's just like they're walking around like, whatever the case. And it's just, it seems like it's getting worse and it's getting worse. And then with the attack on testosterone level, I mean, what makes a man and a woman, right? The hormones of testosterone and estrogen, correct? So,
although those even those definitions now are blurring, and it's become, in many social circles, it's hard to even use that language anymore.
Well, I agree.
But candidates for the Supreme Court who need a biology degree to make a determination of what is a man or a woman, but yeah, it's a different world, and I think feminism, is certainly, it's a great thing for women to be empowered. It's fantastic, but it shouldn't be at the expense of men, or masculinity, and so there's a difference between being a patriarchal society, or the patriarchy is a way of suppressing or oppressing women. Obviously a bad thing. But for a traditionally masculine man to now have to apologize for being that way is also a bad thing.
It is. And there's nothing wrong with having emotions or vulnerabilities or whatever. That's not what masculinity is. I mean, and I think part of the blurring issue is the connotations and definitions of what masculinity actually is.
Right.
And, what makes a man and a woman and a woman. And I know what you're saying. I don't subscribe to that nonsense. I'm not going to go recreate definitions in biology and any of that. So if you subscribe to that, that's cool. I got no problem with it. I just don't live there. So when I think of it as man and woman. And I think it's changing the way that life has been our entire lives. I have an issue with it. I do. And I am big. I've put so much study into hormones and, testosterone and
Sure.
also with females because I work with so many. And so I subscribe to that and live by it. But I just don't like this attack on men being men. And you don't, and like you were saying, it doesn't resonate to the other side, because if you went that way, you might as well just never go speak in public again. I mean,
Right.
Seriously, you might as well just disappear off the face of the earth, because you'll be the worst person that ever lived. But it's okay to, to come one way. And I got a big issue with that too. I just think that a lot of people are fed up with some of this stuff, and they're fighting back or they're speaking back. And when more and more and more people do it, you can't censor everybody and you can't attack everybody. You know what I mean? And I think there's a big fear amongst so many people, and you don't have to get angry about it, and you just speak your mind and give the facts. And I think there's more reasonable people than this nonsensical stuff it's starting to go back a little bit. I see it.
There's a little bit of a pushback going on, and even our book, Alpha Male Challenge, was intended to be somewhat of a pushback on that, to essentially redefine what is an alpha male,
right?
And in a context of how do you be a leader, a traditional masculine leader, without being an asshole, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was essentially how we defined alpha male, as being the leader with all of the attributes of courage and vitality and strength, of both physical strength and strength of character. A lot of the book dealt with what we called alpha attitude, which was having the right attitude to be a leader, to be to have courage and confidence and all of the things that go hand in hand with traditional masculinity, without being toxic.
Yeah.
Masculinity isn't itself toxic.
No.
And but some believe it is. And I think that's where I disagree. I don't think being feminine or being masculine is toxic. Some people are toxic, and they happen to be men, and they may act in ways that are, very bad and mistreat others. But that isn't because they're masculine or because they're men. It's because they're assholes.
That's right. I mean,
there are some women who are the same.
Yeah.
So I think we shouldn't use these sorts of identity, buckets to put people in. We should judge people without really looking at, those sorts of things, and judge them on how they act and who they are and what they are inside, and how they treat others.